Hello, and welcome to Keep the Channel Open. My name is Mike Sakasagawa. This week I'm pleased to bring you a conversation I had with Rebecca Louise Webb, who is a friend of mine and a fellow photographer here in San Diego. Rebecca just recently opened a two-person show at the San Diego Art Institute called Sticks of the Sun, Ashes of the Night, which brings together a new series of her called Mother Nature, with a series from photographer Jesse Burke called Wild and Precious. Both bodies of work center around the relationship of the two artists' kids to the natural world. I got a chance to attend the opening of that show, and I really enjoyed all of the work on display, so I wanted to sit down with Rebecca and have a chat about it. So, in just a minute, you'll hear that. Before I get to that, though, so Rebecca and I both make very personal work related to our children. Actually, I know a lot of artists working in that space, and one of the things I've been thinking about lately is the conversation around parenthood and art, and specifically motherhood and art. A few weeks ago, I saw an article a Facebook friend of mine had shared called 6 Questions About Art and Parenthood. And it got me to thinking about the differences about how mothers and fathers get received differently by the art world. See, I've shown my family work at portfolio reviews and online, and I've got a pretty wide range of responses. And by now, I'm pretty used to hearing the comment from a reviewer that this is a well-trodden subject. But then almost as often, I'll get people who congratulate me for engaging with my family, for being involved, for being a dad who incorporates that part of his identity into his work. And talking to many of my peers in this genre, it mainly seems like women don't get that same praise, only the pushback and the criticism, and the implication that that is a part of their lives that they shouldn't include in their work. And that's just ludicrous to me, because parenthood is such a major part of your life once you have kids. It affects so much of how you see yourself and how you see the world. How could it not also be part of your art? I mean, if that art is authentic, if it's really coming from you, how could it not? It really speaks to this cultural bias against women, that they get such a different response from what men get. And I think that's something worth looking at, especially because so much of the work that has meant so much to me has been personal, has been family-oriented. Anyway, I'll put a link to that article in the show notes, and if you've got some thoughts on the topic, send me an email, podcast@keepthechanneleopen.com. All right, so let's get to my conversation with Rebecca. We referenced a couple different bodies of work in the conversation, both the one from the San Diego Art Institute show that I mentioned before, as well as an older series called Sutures, Stories with Seams. Both of those series are on Rebecca's website, so I'll put links to them in the show notes. Definitely go check those out. They're great. And now here's my talk with Rebecca Webb. So congratulations on your show.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed it. And I really, I thought that the presentation of the two of you together was really great, very strong, conceptually, hung together really well. And I cannot stop thinking about particularly one of your images. And it was, I think it's called Echo Lake. Mm-hmm. And there's something about it that really, it speaks to the theme that you had in your statement, certainly. But what I was thinking about your series as it was displayed in the show is that it really addresses a whole lot of things, and that image in particular, where you have your son smack in the middle of the frame, and on one side you have this blue water, on the other side of him behind him you have the green foliage. He's holding the turtle, and there's so much in it, the gesture, the way that he has his shirt off and you can see his face, his body, where his body kind of looks like still sort of childlike, where you can kind of see the young child in him still, but then in his face it's starting to mature and you can kind of see the outlines of what he's going to look like as a man, and that the way that he's sort of cradling the turtle is very gentle. That this really spoke to me as like this transition, like moment of transition. And I thought that is, like I just couldn't stop looking at it while I was there. I went away and came back to it a bunch of times, and like I actually got a little choked up looking at it. But one of the things that I was really thinking about, what I liked about your show, about both of the bodies of work that were in it, is I kind of mentioned this to you at the time. I feel like a lot of people right now are sort of interested, especially photographically, in this idea of where is technology taking us. And a lot of people do this in a way that's very sort of surface level and very sort of hand-wringing and kind of facile. You know, like I don't know how many people I've seen where it's just like a bunch of teenagers standing on a street corner with this vapid look on their faces. They're all looking at their phones.
Right.
But what you chose to do was take a different angle entirely, where you're showing your son and then also his friend entirely without technology. And I thought that was a really interesting angle to take at a similar theme, and in a way that doesn't come across as sort of shrill in the way that many of these other projects I've seen do. And I was just wondering if you could sort of talk about, just to start off with, what your decision-making process was for this.
Sure. Just in response to what you said before about creating work that can talk about technology, and that really is a trend. It's almost as if it's really talking about the medium photography as well, and where photography, sort of the state of photography today, and the idea of a cameraless image as well, and talking really about the medium itself. And it just seems like there's a lot of that. And I think I naturally gravitate towards work that is not only in the work that I like to look at, but like to make, which is pretty intimate and personal. But yet it's really talking about some of the things that have been really predominant in my life right now, and that is the role of technology, and how much that has really been an issue for, as a parent, raising a child. And I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but one thing I do want to mention is the image that you're talking about, Echo Lake. It's funny that you say that you don't see the technology, but yet if you stand back until you come close to it, you think he's holding a cell phone in the water. I'm not sure if you were able to saw that for yourself, but a lot of people thought that at first he's holding a cell phone. That didn't occur to me. The way he's looking down at it. I wish I could say that was intentional, but it was one of those nice surprises after. There is one more image too, where the boys are laying on a big fluffy material out in a field, and they are actually holding their phones as well. But for the most part, the decision to leave out the technology, and that was your question, right? What was my approach to thinking about the way
how this body of work sort of developed, you know?
Right. Yeah. Again, so it was a response to my son wanting to play video games all the time, not getting out, and talking to parents, and how they would say to me how they have to kick them out to play outdoors, I just really got interested in that idea, and it's really interesting because part of it too, I wonder how much of my sentiment is nostalgic, a faux nostalgia actually, for a childhood that I had, feeling like I was playing outdoors all the time.
And where did you grow
in Rhode
up?
Island?
In Rhode Island, okay.
Yeah, Barrington, Rhode Island, and I seem to recall playing outdoors all day long, coming home with scraped knees and being really exhausted at the end of the day. Of course, computers weren't a part of our lives back then, so, we had to find things to do. But I really would see my son just really opting to be on his computer all the time and playing video games, and now that he's a little bit older, always on his cell phone and not getting outdoors. And that image, Echo Lake, coming back to that again, when you were talking about this transition of his face being more mature and his body still belying his was the preteen body. You could see that. I mean, he's a little bit overweight actually in that picture, and that is from, I think, not playing outdoors enough or being outdoors. And it just really started to interest me, this ambivalence that we're developing, and not just children but adults, and the fear that adults create for children in a way too. Oh, don't go outside, stranger danger, don't play out too long, there's constant supervision. It just feels very different now than when I was a child.
Yeah, and I think that's that's another angle that other people working in this space don't really engage with, but is in your artist statement certainly, and I feel like it's in the work that this it's not really just other people often take a sort of, oh, kids these days kind of thing, without necessarily recognizing that these kids are a product of sort of their parental attitudes.
Absolutely, yeah.
And having that sort of, stay here where I can keep my eye on you. I mean, that's definitely something that's different from when I was growing up. I know when I was a kid, I grew up in sort of a small town, Northern California, and from the time I was maybe 10 years old or so, I was walking around the neighborhood by myself. I was, walking 2 miles to one of my friends' houses, and I remember that experience being very valuable to me, but at the same time, when I think about my own kids, it's kind of like, well, my son is 7 now, my oldest. In a couple of years, would I feel comfortable with him walking down the street to a mile away to go to one of his friends' houses?
What would you attribute that to? Why do you think that? Why would you feel that way?
Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting because a big part of it for me, and this isn't necessarily going to be the case for everybody, but is that San Diego is a much bigger town than what I was used to, and I didn't. I live in a suburban area now, but even at that, it's still very different from where I grew up. I lived across a creek from a forest, so we didn't worry as much about stuff like what people would do. Because everybody knew their neighbors and everybody sort of had, there was more of a feeling of community, which has its ups and downs, but it was really, the things that you would be more worried about I remember parents talking to their kids about at the time were, because we didn't have sidewalks in the neighborhoods, like make sure you don't get hit by a car,
right.
And also stuff like here's how you avoid getting attacked by a mountain lion if you're out in the woods, which that part certainly has no bearing on my kids' lives, but I feel like maybe a big part of it is that I don't really know my neighbors, and it feels more living in a real city, even if I don't live in a really urban part of it, really sort of changes my attitude about how I relate to the world around me.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, a lot has to do, really, the crux of that is this idea of community. Communities have changed so much, and that the close network. I'm generalizing, but I think that in a large place like San Diego, a large city like San Diego, that's the case. And when I think back, I'm a child of the 70s, and I'm a single mother, and she was coming from a different place. There was a different attitude back then as well than it is now, and perhaps they were trying. I think that generation, parents were really trying to figure themselves out, and the role of a parent, it was not the same as it is now in terms of children are very much reflection of who we are, and I think there's a lot more investment in that in children than when I was growing up, if that makes sense. But one thing I wanted to say too is that I do notice the shift in the role that technology plays in our lives as parents. I remember when Jack was younger, and I used to have him sit in front of Bambi so I could make dinner. So this electronic babysitter idea, and how that's really taken to an extreme now. For instance, whenever I go to parties, children really don't interact with each other, and parents are very much part of this. They give their children devices in order to keep them occupied. And it just seems that, and then there's no engagement with others, there's no engagement with running around, there's no, self-initiated exploration and
That's really interesting.
Playing. And so, sorry, just that I just find that really fascinating. That is very different. Even though I could say I was a latchkey kid and watched a lot of television when I was growing up. It's really not the same thing where at every twist and turn you are a child is engaged with a device and looking down.
Yeah, it's interesting because. Sort of my age, I was born in '79, and I was really more an '80s and '90s kid than '70s. So my generation are sort of the first generation of I think parents who really sort of grew up with video games being a thing, like with home video game consoles really being. There were video games before I was around, but it wasn't really. It was really more of a novelty thing rather than like a pervasive part of the youth culture. Mm-hmm. But it's funny because a lot of my memories of that time were that the games were something that we could build a social experience around, where. And I wonder if it maybe has something more to do with the sort of delivery system for the games now that we have all these handheld mobile devices rather than, all like 4 or 5 kids huddled around the same TV. I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah, so I think, the work that I created really was for sort of fable tale of this, and it's been observed, and it naturally came out for me that there's this darker element to it because it's a darker commentary on what technology is doing, and sort of the fears that we imbue our environment with. As an alternative to staying safe indoors with your device, right? And so I think that's really what I was exploring, and I think the video I created was based on. I don't know if you know this, but the video. Did you get a chance to see the video? Yeah. So the video really has an ominous quality to it of my son with his fingers, becoming almost zoomorphic. They become almost spider-like as they're, playing the console, or I think that's what it's called, the little console. But that actually was riffing off of a film from 1978, Hertz Frank, who made a short film called 10 Minutes Older, and it was based on, he actually filmed children watching a puppet show, but you never saw the puppet show. And it's just their faces in the dark, and they're responding to the puppet show. And so that was my comment. And I think to me that video really just sums up very, very clearly and succinctly what really the whole show is about. And so you see the expression on his face. And what's interesting is that the Hertz Frank piece, they were very expressive. They demonstrated fear and joy and everything in between. Whereas my son, he almost seems, because I slowed it down also to 60 frames a second, he almost seems emotionless, which is really fascinating to me because what he's watching actually are zombies, Nazi zombies being killed, and the time that you see the red on his face is when the blood is being splattered everywhere, and he's just blasé about it, and so. I'm just finding it really, really fascinating what's going on with children and technology and our complicit, our meaning parents, our complicit, behavior, and what are we fostering in our relationships with our children.
Yeah, and I guess that's true. I spent so much time thinking about the still images in your show that I hadn't spent as much time considering how the stills and the video sort of interrelate with each other. It's definitely interesting because the photographs have a real sort of feeling of wonder to them, where there isn't really any sense of, or to me at least, of darkness.
Oh, because that's what a lot of people have told me, that they see doom and dawn, so to speak.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder if how much of this maybe just is my particular background growing up in the woods where I did. That, although, even at that, like, I do know from my own experiences being alone out in a forest that it can be kind of a spooky experience.
Well, and the stories that have been built up about forests as well, not only in popular culture, but just through fairy tales, right? I mean, there's a lot of horrific things that happen in forests and the Grimm brothers.
Sure,
right?
sure. Or even, when I was growing up, every campsite that was around my area through Big Sur and Carmel and everything, but you'd have some associated legend of, like, some crazy man who lived out in the woods not too far from this campsite kind of thing. And I think scoutmasters and stuff would use that to make sure that their kids stayed in their tents until the sun came up, which now I'm older, I kind of think that was mainly just a way to let the scoutmasters sleep in. But I do remember at the time finding that very sort of ominous.
And they stay with you too. The stories, and there is something. Forests are metaphorical on a lot of levels, and just in fairy tales, as I said, in popular culture, or and then the idea of nature, and something that really interests me too is this idea of pastoral landscapes, or the pristine aspects of forests, and human intervention into these landscapes, and putting cell phone towers with that look like trees, and how we're manipulating these lands, and there's really land and forests, and et cetera, to benefit, move technology forward, et cetera, and just, our relationship to land, how much that's changing, and our control over the land too, and our control over those fears. I think there's a lot more to explore, actually, and I'm really interested actually in forests as a metaphor, and something I'm getting really interested in is our artists who are creating performances or manipulations of forests or interventions, and really talking about that this nostalgia for a past that did it ever exist, and so I'm just really interested in exploring that a little bit more.
Yeah, there's definitely, I think there's a lot of, one of the things that I sort of, in my own work, sometimes have to reckon with is the sort of distinction between sort of, one, how I remember something, two, how it actually was in my perspective at the time, and how that may have changed, but then also because I only had my own perspective at the time, like how that might have differed from how anybody else might have seen the same things. And I think when you talk about, is this something that ever really existed? It's like that is something that it's a little difficult to get your arms around sometimes.
It is. It's interesting. Speaking of this, is a piece that's emblematic of that idea too is the Eucalyptus Trunk I had in the show, where I've inserted electrical outlet plates.
Yeah,
and
the title of which had a bunch of us cracking up.
Well, yeah, it actually because I think there's actually a lot of research about children needing to be out in nature and how important it is for their cognitive development, their social, cognitive, psychological well-being, and that was a great line it was actually from an article, and a child was quoted as saying, they'd rather play indoors because they're closer to electrical outlets, and that's where that came from. But what's really interesting to me is I was talking to my father the other day, who is an architect. He was part of a 1960s group called Archigram. They were considered the Beatles of architecture, from London, and they influenced a lot of architectural movements, utopic, visionary architecture that was never built, but it was really trying to come up with solutions to public problems, essentially through architecture. Anyways, I found out that my father, one of his colleagues, came up with, he did something similar. I didn't know about this, but it was called the cyberkinetic forest, where logs, you could plug into logs. And this was like back in the 1960s.
Wow.
And so it's amazing that this, for me, and I think it's really interesting just that I've created this piece not knowing about sort of the little history behind it that's very much connected to my father's work and his colleagues. So I just thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
That maybe I was, I knew about it, but I had sublimated it and then it came forth. But something else that's really interesting too is, speaking of my father, is that and this electronic log, so to speak, is that I'm really interested, as I said, in land. And my father just recently gave us, my siblings and I, 44 acres of land in Massachusetts, near the Berkshires. I don't know if you know that area. It's,
not really.
It's pristine forest land, and so I think that's where I'm going to be going for my next project.
Western Massachusetts?
Yeah, it's Western Massachusetts, and near Tanglewood, sort of near Tanglewood and Jacob's Pillow and Massamoka.
Okay. I mean, I spent a little bit of time there because I have a brother-in-law that lives in near Amherst.
Oh, okay. I love Amherst.
Yeah, but I don't know the area really well.
But I think I'm going to get back to exploring that a little bit, but and then something to do with my father, I think, as well. There's a lot of interesting history and his connection to this land and the gift that he's giving my siblings and I. I think there's something there, so I really want to continue exploring forests in relationship to family and the intimacy and the personal story. Something that really continues to be my focus. Yeah.
I mean, I feel like a lot of your work, at least the work of yours that I'm familiar with, has had a very personal aspect to it. I mean, obviously, this latest body of work is intensely personal because it is all like your son and his friend, and there's that. But I think the work of yours that I first knew was the sutures, which I was thinking about this last night. I was trying to remember sort of the sequence of events of this. I know that the first time I ever saw your name was when you had a lens scratch feature for that work. And then as I recall, sometime not too long after that, I think we met at the Medium Festival. And then after that was when you had a piece from that, or a couple pieces from that, in the show that Scott Davis curated at the Downtown Library.
That's right.
Yeah. And that was a body of work that I also really liked a lot.
Thank you.
And I think, working in these, having a series where they're not all diptychs, but those are the ones that tended to stick in my mind the most, where you have these two images juxtaposed and it's really not obvious at first glance what the relationship between them is, especially, I mean, this was a couple years ago now that I saw this, and in the interim I've had even more time to sort of learn more about visual art, and because I don't have an art background myself, but some of the relationships, now that I returned to that work, I went and looked through it again last night just to sort of prepare for this, and it's just as good as I remembered.
Oh, thank you.
That some of the visual relationships are a little clearer to me now, but I think that what really I remember I was just recently I was talking to Trin Mai for the podcast, and she was saying something about my work, about how it being this view where you almost, it's so intimate where you almost feel like this isn't something I should be looking at, except that I know that you're letting me look at it. And as I was thinking about that series, that is exactly sums up that feeling about that series for me, that so many of the pictures are so intimate. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because I don't know if I could make that work now.
Yeah.
I look back and I think, wow, I was brave and courageous to do work like that. It could just be getting older, or really moving beyond that topic, I think. But they were very personal. I was inspired actually by a class that I took at Harvard with Sage Sawyer, the photographer. And I really started to make the work then. I was living in Arlington, Massachusetts, working at Harvard. So that was my day job in a completely different field, political science. And I was exploring what it meant to be a mother. Ultimately, it was about being a mother and about my husband, my first husband, and the relationship we had, and really trying to figure that out and what I wanted as an artist. Mm-hmm. I think it's really those things, and yeah, I was a lot braver, foolish perhaps, but I've left the work up. I mean, foolish in the sense that I was being very raw and open, and I would not be that way. And I think even this series with Jack, that's still pretty open and raw, but it's not to the same degree. But I can really see that. I think that was the last vestige of me doing this, working in such a raw and intimate way. I think I'm going to be moving away from that a little bit. But at the same time, maybe that's my voice, and maybe I can't help it, if that makes sense. Maybe that is the way I will end up expressing myself, because that's my voice, and everyone has their voice. And
I mean, I know I have a really hard time if I ever try to make something that isn't just it isn't exactly me or about me in some way, that I might be able to use something about myself to say something that I try to say something universal and relatable, but if it's not actually from me, then it ends up feeling very sort of sterile.
Disingenuous.
Yeah.
I know we do come somewhat from the same ilk in terms of there are our personal stories, and from that comes we hope our people can relate on a universal level, right? Mm-hmm. It's the personal and the universal, and yeah, exactly. I mean, that's how we tell our stories, and it comes from a very authentic place. And one can try to divorce themselves from that and maybe do something a little more abstract. But then, I mean, that's what I'm passionate about. And it's, from what I gather, you're very passionate about how you're telling your stories as well.
Yeah.
And again, it's this idea of voice.
Yeah.
And what I find really interesting is that that one can't really escape who one is, right? I mean, that's why it's always so very personal to put a show up. And that's another thing. I think when I step back from hanging a show, I think I must be crazy. What am I doing putting myself out there like that? And it's the same thing with the work. And yet we do that. And that is part of, how we express ourselves. So.
Yeah. And I would say, too, that most of the work that has really meant the most to me, that has really resonated with me, has been really personal and has had that sort of vulnerability to it, where you can really tell that this is something that the person who made it is invested in. Mm-hmm. And not to say that there's definitely purely aesthetic work that I've enjoyed and loved, and there's been more intellectual work that I love, but but the ones that I keep coming back to, like one of the first photo books that ever made me cry, and it was one of the first photo books I ever owned, was Judith Fox's I Still Do. Mm-hmm. You know that one?
I absolutely do. Yes.
Oh my God!
Yeah.
And it just
beautiful.
I have trouble going back to it sometimes because it's kind of crushing.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's things like that where, I mean, this is a subject that is so the artist is so in it, and that's what I felt with all of your work that I know as well, that there is this you're present in the images, even the ones that you're not actually literally portrayed in. Like in the sutures ones, it seemed like maybe a third or a half of them you actually appear in the pictures. but even the ones where you don't literally appear in them, there is this sense of the artist in the photograph, and to me that's I mean that is what always really strikes me, you know.
Yeah, I really approach that work really I think from a painter's and filmmaker's sort of language, because that's my background, and so the diptychs I think really came from that. But again, it's this idea of the narrative, of telling a story, and I think those are, you know, the diptych format really lends itself to that. So. Yeah, and it really invites you. You know, it's one of those things where you never want to make things either too obvious or too obscure. But I felt like that series really struck a nice balance where it's not impenetrable, but it's not obvious at all. But it's done in a way that it really invites the viewer to try and puzzle out what is the relationship here. Yeah, it took me. You know, I was very conscientious about that as well, because they're seemingly disparate, but they speak to each other to create a new story. I mean, the idea is you're creating a new narrative, and it can be an individual experience, but you know, aesthetically, I tried to make them work together. Mm-hmm. Conceptually, I try to make them work together. That there's an element that has, like you were saying, that you perceive the connection, and one talks about the other, and our relationship to space and history, and sort of the ghosts are ghosts of the past in a way, and so and how that shapes our current relationships. So that's really what that work is about. But yeah, as you were initially saying, it is very. It is very raw and diaristic almost, mm-hmm. and you know, and obviously has a lot, because it has a lot of meaning for me. And there is, I mean, I remember that time and all the things I was going through, and each image or diptych really makes it very fresh and alive for me, what I experienced at that time. So it'll be interesting when I'm an old woman, you know, in my 80s, and I look back at the work and, you know, sort of what feelings I have about that then. So.
Yeah. I always personally have a little trouble revisiting some of my older work, because it's always such a strange thing when you make something that's so meaningful at the time, and it is a representation of you at that moment. But right. As you get older, you can't help but change, and maybe, you know, your values may not change, but what's important to you right at that moment may not be what you're thinking about now, or maybe what you were worried about then is you've decided, well, you know, it's okay, or all of that. The emotions are, for me, it's always a little jarring to revisit that kind of thing.
Absolutely. But what do you think about something, you know, that's very interesting right now that I think we were starting to have a dialogue on Facebook about, and with a few others, is this idea of, because it's so personal and raw, you know, there's a niche audience for it. And because really the trend, so to speak, right now is a little more, I would say, impersonal. You know, where does our work fit in this spectrum, or this, you know, this movement? And what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing. So just for reference, the thing that we started talking about was this piece on Elinor Carucci, where she was talking about her work, and mm-hmm. she made a statement where she felt that there's less and less emotional art right now, and art is very intellectual right now. Right. My personal feeling has been that I feel like over the past maybe 5 years or so, that it's actually the other direction, that it's been over the past couple 3 decades that we've seen increasing intellectualism in art. For me, I feel like, and granted, I'm not very educated about this stuff, but just my sort of non-scientific, don't worry about it, my sort of non-scientific impression is that that it really starts in like the 80s or so, where mm-hmm. you start seeing like the 60s and 70s had a more romantic feel in some cases, but it really in the 80s and 90s and early aughts you see all of this highly intellectual art in just every medium. And really meta art too, like art about art.
Yeah, right. It's commenting on itself.
Yeah, and I feel like it was interesting that Carucci was saying that, because I really feel like she's a perfect example of how the pendulum is starting to move the other direction, and because her work, I feel like her mother work sort of blew up maybe like a few years ago, and I was sort of seeing it all over the place. And her profile hasn't really lowered since then, right? Like she seems like she's kind of everywhere.
She's steady. Yeah. She's on jury panels and showing here and there, and just as a respected, not authority, but a respected person in the world of photography.
Yeah.
And she also does a lot of commercial work, I think, too, for New York Times and so on and so forth. So
yeah. And then a lot of the people that I know that I sort of feel like are, not to say I'm on the same level as them, but like are closer to my sort of emerging status. I feel like I see a lot of people in that space who are making a lot more personal work, a lot more, where the emotions are very naked in the pictures.
Who could you, for instance, who are you speaking about?
Well, I mean, when I first started trying to make art photographically, the people that really, there were maybe 2 or 3 women who just like really stuck out at me, who were like contemporary artists, and like Elizabeth Fleming was one.
And I don't know who she is.
Yeah, she has a series that's called Life is a Series of Small Moments, that is like a very direct influence on what I do. I actually kind of hope I'm not ripping her off.
I'll check her work out.
Yeah, and then there was she also had another series a couple years later that was called Buried on Her 90th Birthday, about her grandmother's passing, that was just knocked me out. And then there's another woman. She's based out of Scarsdale, New York. Andy Schreiber.
Oh right, sure.
Yeah.
Of her work.
Yeah, and I've reached out to them and sort of developed a little bit of a relationship to where I can kind of, like, especially with Andy, she's sort of coached me through developing my work a little bit.
Great.
But a lot of in that sort of family genre, I feel like you're seeing a lot more of that right now. And it's actually to the point where, like, in reviews and stuff, people will tell me that there's a lot of people doing this right now.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I mean, it is a document of our times, though, too.
Yeah.
And, and how will it be perceived in retrospect will be interesting as well. So, yeah, it's, but still, I think it depends on this idea of, what's important to you as a photographer, like broader audiences or niche appeal, right? Because there's still, perhaps, someone outside of the fine art photography world might not really understand this work. So, or maybe they will, maybe it will. The idea is to have it become universal. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because, at least in terms of response, what I find is exactly the opposite. That the pushback I get tends to be from the art establishment more. Like, it's more gallerists and publishers who are like, this is not edgy, this is not contemporary, or even if they're being positive, they'll be like, this is good and it has real truth in it, but this isn't something that would sell. Like, this isn't something I could really do anything with. Or like a museum person saying, like, I think this is great, but like, it's just not really appropriate for our venue. Where, on the other hand, it's really more the lay people that have approached my work in a way where they feel where they really get what I'm doing, and where there have been some, more than a handful of artists who have also been very complimentary about my work, but I feel like it's really sort of the people who don't necessarily have that fine art background who are connecting the most deeply. But I mean, is that different from what your experience has been?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's really, I mean, I think just for instance, if I post the images on Facebook, I mean, I really get more of a response from artist circles versus the lay public. That a lot of people don't really get that this is work you hang on walls, so to speak, if that makes any sense. I'm finding much more being embraced by fine art community versus fine art photography community than the lay public.
Yeah.
So
well, there's definitely a difference between what I would say is that, like, building off of that, is that a lot of people, the people that connect with the work, connect with it very deeply. But not in a way that would translate to sales.
Right. That's the other thing. Right. Exactly. Because think about it. I mean, if you're not a collector and you look at this work, you say, why? And they probably think to themselves, why would I want to hang someone else's child on my wall?
Yeah.
Kind of thing. If they don't really understand the context of the work, or the what you're trying to say, or the relevance in terms of the fine art photography fields, right? And so, I mean, that's really tricky. I mean, it's also in Jesse's work. He's dealing with that as well. And so, to be a viable artist and to be able to sell work, in order to continue to make work, that's a little tricky.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, if the few sales that I make tend to be the ones that are less, not necessarily less specific, but like more abstract.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Accessible. Then.
Yeah. One of the things that I kind of think maybe just in terms of making the work accessible in a sales kind of way is that in some ways I feel like books are more are something that's easier to understand that way with this subject matter than like a wall print.
Yeah.
And especially
thank you for that advice.
Well, I mean, I not like I'm selling a lot of books either, but
that's what I actually am thinking about creating a book. But then, how do you translate? Because the installations and the video were pretty important to me as a part of the series, which is also really exciting for me because I've never done that before. I've never had tactile, three-dimensional objects as a part of a show before.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure, how I would translate that, But back to your point, though, with yours, how are you doing with your books? I know that you made some handcrafted books.
Yeah,
right?
And I'm still plugging away at them. And I actually just am having a self-published paperback edition of my Handmade book as well.
Oh, wonderful.
That was some advice I got from Allie Smithson.
Oh, okay.
That it's something that if I were able to price it very low, that I people would like it and would buy it. I think one of the things with photo books in general and handmade books, like artist books in specific, are that the price point is not something that people really that's where it's not like the concept of purchasing it that it would be a sticking point for people, but rather the price point. Because
sorry about that. I better turned it off.
No,
okay?
No worries.
It's just. I'll continue. Sorry.
Where even like a lot of photo books are selling in the $40 to $60 range, and that's not something that most people really conceive of as like a coffee table book.
Right.
And for the handmade books that I'm making, I have an edition of 10 of them, and each one takes me days to make.
I'd love to see one. I really would.
We'll get together.
Okay, that'd be marvelous. Yeah.
But like, it's not like I can sell. I can't even really sell those at like $50. I mean, I wouldn't even make my money back on materials at that point. And even if I was just there's because they are a limited run, like even selling them for like $100, or like, I think I calculated that the the cost of goods would be like maybe $115, which, you know, to someone who's a collector, that's nothing, right?
Right, exactly.
But to someone who's just like a average Joe on the street, paying $115 for a 14-page book is like, are you crazy?
So when does your self-published book come out?
It's gonna. I'm expecting to receive them next week.
Oh my! How exciting! That's wonderful. And what is the title of your book?
It's called. My goodness, we're talking a lot more about me than.
No. This is very interesting. It's inspiring to me as well. So it's a two-way street. It's a dialogue.
It's called Sheets: A Love Letter, and it's sort of just a short little love letter, really, to my wife.
Lovely.
Yeah. People seem to like it. I don't know. Not enough to buy it yet, but.
And what publishing site are you using for that?
So Aline actually mentioned the Sarah Macell's book. I don't know if you know Sarah Macell's work. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Macel.
Okay.
And she did a very cheap. Not cheap, inexpensive run of softcover books.
Yeah, we're trying to promote your book. Let's not say cheap.
Called her book was called Kiss and Tell.
Okay.
She did an edition of 100 and sold them for $20 each, and they're great. There's all stories about. She asked a bunch of her friends and people she knew, and might have even just been some acquaintances too. About a first kiss experience that they had that was memorable, and then she went to that place and photographed that place where it happened.
Oh, really?
And just the combination of the text and the pictures is really it was very heartwarming.
How did she do with the?
She sold out the edition.
Really? And what site should she do it through?
She did it through a press called Edition One Books.
Is that what you use?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
They seem to have a pretty good. Set of options for cover designs and stuff like that. And what I particularly liked about them is that the reproductions are pretty good, and especially if you're doing soft covers, like they have hardcover and soft cover options. It's not it's pretty affordable. So if you were. If you're like me and have a day job, or if you want to do a Kickstarter or something, like for a couple grand, you could put together an edition of 100, 150 books, depending on your what options.
When can we expect your Kickstarter campaign?
Mine's just self-financed, but got to charge up those credit cards and maybe hope they come back. I don't know. We'll see how it does. I don't know. But no, enough about me.
No, this is very, very informative. Yeah, but there is that. How do you, for instance, I have the show now, and so how do you build upon it and not just let it languish and just sort of like be this little blip? And how can you continue the body of work and create impact or have a life outside of the show, and where next?
Yeah.
So that's where I'm at right now. I'm really trying to figure that out, and a book. I think a book is a nice idea.
Yeah,
actually.
And I think your show partner, Jesse Burke, he has a book that's coming out of that series.
He already has it. It's called Wild and Precious, and it's for sale at the San Diego Art Institute, and you can get it online as well.
Yeah.
So,
and then that show has been his series has been traveling a lot too. Yeah,
it was at Rhode Island School of Design and I think somewhere else, but he's getting covered by. That's a really interesting topic as well, that his work is getting covered by like Vice magazine, various newspapers, I think Outside magazine, etc. And what makes his work accessible or interesting to the public, where maybe my work is a little darker. I was really interesting because we were thinking in the beginning to have REI sponsor the show because they were there was that Black Friday event where they so they would shutter their doors. So we thought, well, we'll reach out to them because our show is all about getting out in nature. And they wrote back and said, we think your work is really beautiful, but it's not the kind of, it's not what we want to say about being out in nature. They felt it was really dark.
Yeah.
And so,
well, I mean, it's definitely not the sort of glossy, inspirational type of stuff.
Whereas Jesse's is much more that, I think, about this father-daughter journey out into nature, and I think mine's the foil to that work. I mean, even his images are a lot of them are really light and airy, so to speak, and mine are darker toned, and I think that's an interesting contrast. And in terms of everything we've been talking about today about audiences, I think is something really interesting, and what audiences can get their heads wrapped around and access versus a particular niche group, which I think really I'm discovering with my work. It feels like it's more niche versus more universal, which I think Jesse is experiencing. So I think it's kind of interesting that
it is, and it's a tough sort of thing. I've sort of reconciled myself to this idea that that my potential audience is always going to be fairly small and fairly specific, and I feel like as long as where it hits hard, then that's got to just sort of be enough for me, and it's actually really gratifying, because I've had a few interactions with people, and they'll say, oh, this really meant a lot to me, and that in turn means a lot to me.
Ultimately, what do you want, though? What would be your ideal scenario as a photographer? I
mean, ideally, I think the thing, well, it almost seems, I know actually for a fact not every artist wants this, but it seems like what most of the time every artist wants is just to be able to quit their day job. Yeah. Those of us who do have that, or at least to be able to transition into something where your day job is something that you feel passionate about.
And you don't right now? I'm about to say that on tape.
I don't think anybody at my office
You're an engineer.
Yeah,
right?
I am. I'm an electrical engineer.
Right.
I don't think anybody at my office is under any illusions that that's where my passion is. Everybody there knows I'm a photographer, and it's sort of a running joke in the office that if you get there early enough in the morning, you'll see me taking flash pictures of the inside of my coffee cup. Kind of thing. Yeah. But I mean,
that's your reputation.
Yeah, it's I don't mind being the office weirdo. That's all right. At least if it's being weird for that reason, that's not so bad. But I mean,
aren't all engineers though?
There's weird and then there's
weird,
yeah,
right?
So
well, that's where I'm lucky, because my day job is I really think it's a wonderful day job, and as a film curator, and it's very allowed, like I've absolute creative freedom, and it's really wonderful, and it feeds the work I do. However, it would be amazing just to be able to make work. I always lament the fact that I just, I have all these ideas, and I would love to be able to execute them and have the, the funds, the time, time to do it. And as you get older too, it just feels like there's less. But ironically, coming back to my son, since my son is a lot more self-contained, I do have, more mental space, although except for high school right now, but I do have some more mental space to be able to do the work. And, very, very few photographers can make it if you're not a commercial photographer as a fine art photographer. And, you have to ultimately decide what is it that you want, and to tell your stories. And ultimately for me, it is about telling stories. It really is. And again, coming back to this idea of hoping that you can have people who can connect to your work, and have meaning. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Well, I think that is an excellent note to wrap up on.
Excellent.
Thank you so much for sitting down with me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was actually a lot of fun, and not that I didn't think it was going to be, but I really enjoyed it, and even off tape, I think we could have a really great conversation.
Oh,
so,
yeah.
I really enjoy your insight, hearing
you.
your insight at the festivals. And,
likewise.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Thank you so much. Yeah.
So that was my conversation with Rebecca Webb. Wasn't that great? She's so articulate and surprisingly patient with me talking about myself so much. So thanks so much to her for that. If you'd like to learn more about Rebecca's work, you can check out her website at RebeccaWebbStudio.com. That's web with 2 B's. And if you are in the San Diego area, Rebecca's show is still on display at the San Diego Art Institute until this coming Sunday, February 7th, and I encourage you to go check that out. Our theme music is by Poddington Bear. You can find more of his music available for licensing at soundofpicture.com. If you'd like to leave a comment, you can find me and the show on Twitter at ChannelOpenPod, on Facebook at Keep the Channel Open, or send me an email at podcast@keepthechannelelopen.com. I'll be back with a new episode next week, and until then, remember, keep the channel open.